All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here today to discuss the 2023 Washtenaw Read, Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid. I just wanted to open by saying that the author, Kiley Reid, will be at AADL on Sunday, February 5th at 4 p.m. in the downtown lobby for a presentation. There will then be a question and answer session and a book signing to follow that. So if you're listening to this discussion and interested in joining us for that, we would love to see you there. And I just wanted to go around with our participants today to quickly just say your name and your role at the library, so anyone watching knows, kind of who they're listening to. So I'll start. My name is Elizabeth. I'm facilitating this discussion, and I am a librarian at AADL.
I'm Karen Tuthill. I'm in the Human Resources Department.
I'm Emily. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Emily.
I'm Emily. I'm a librarian here at AADL.
And I'm Lucy. And I.
Oops, sorry.
Go ahead.
It always happens. Don't worry.
Book Pro.
I'm Lucy, and I'm library tech in the youth department.
And my name is Jacob. I am in the outreach department.
And my name is Laura, and I'm a public library associate.
And thank you all so much for being here today. There's always a little bit of interruption on Zoom, so don't worry. We always work it out with who gets to talk. So don't be embarrassed or anything if you start talking at the same time. I usually like to open these discussions by asking someone to give a brief, 2 to 3 minute summary of the book, just in case anyone listening hasn't finished it or hasn't fully read it. I think that kind of gets us all in the mindset to talk about it and just kind of refresh if we read it maybe a few weeks or months ago. So if anyone would like to volunteer to kind of give a quick summary, I think that would be a great place to start.
This is embarrassing, but if someone can remind me the name of our protagonist, I think I can go from there.
Amira.
Thank you. So Amira is a young Black woman who is kind of struggling to find who she wants to be in the world. She is working as a part-time transcriptionist, but she also is working as a part-time sitter for a more wealthy family. This takes place in Philadelphia, I think, somewhere in Pennsylvania. And it turns out that that's been working with this young girl, Briar, who is 3 and a real bright young kid, has really been a light in her life. But early on in the book, she gets called to take care of Briar kind of unexpectedly when she's been kind of out with friends. And she lets the people who she works for, she lets them know that she has been at a birthday party, but they say, it's okay, come take her anyway. She needs to leave the house because of something else that's going on. But while she's at the grocery store, a seemingly well-meaning white woman gets very concerned about this young Black woman who is dressed not like how you would expect a babysitter to be, and overhears Briar mention that she's not her mother and gets very concerned and ends up accelerating, calling in the store security, and it becomes this whole thing that kind of sets the tone for the book. So it is both a balance of our main character, Amira, finding out who she is in herself, and then also figuring out who she is in relationship to this family. And then you also get the perspective of Alix, who is the mother of the family, who is maybe finding that that motherhood isn't entirely cracked out how she thought, and living in Philly instead of living in New York is also a bit of a challenge. And then also trying to figure out her relationship with Amira, both what it is and what she wants it to be. And I'll hand it off to anyone else to cover what I missed.
Well, I think that was a great start. Thank you so much, Emily. And I think that actually kind of leads me into my first question, which then I think we'll get into more what else happens in this book, but it's basically kind of told from the perspective. We get two perspectives in this book, that of Amira and that of Alix. And there are other characters, but we don't actually really see into their minds like we do these two women. And so I kind of wanted to ask how you felt that these two perspectives contributed to the telling of the story, and also how your kind of perspectives of the two women and who they were changed over the course of the novel, if they changed. Maybe they didn't, but I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Interesting. I thought that Amira, even though she was looking for who she was, she had a better sense of who she truly was than Alix. Alix was pretending to be someone or trying to make herself into something that she wasn't. So Amira was more true to herself than Alix was.
And even though Amira had to act a certain type of way when she was on the job, she was still more true to herself than Alix, which I think is like a really poignant kind of revelation of the book, is that when people who have jobs like Amira, when they go home, there is a whole nother life. That especially her employer, Alix, which is still funny to say out loud, Alix doesn't even see Amira as a person in that way. She really just falsely assumes that Amira's whole life is caring for her child. So even beyond all that, and despite all of that, Amira is still more true to herself than Alix, or really any other character in the book.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And I think that Alix is constantly thinking about how she's acting and like what the meanings of the meaning of her actions is, as far as like how it validates her as a person. Whereas I think Amira is just navigating her way through her world and having to deal definitely with like microaggressions and systemic racism and classism, definitely more than Alix is. But I really liked having the two perspectives, because I think that it showed how sometimes intent doesn't really excuse an action. And so you might have the best intentions, you might think you're doing the best thing for somebody, but it doesn't make it any less it really doesn't make it any less oppressive or, racist in a way. And I think that Alix just constantly thinks she's doing the right thing by Amira, but yet they have a totally transactional relationship. So I just really liked the 2 points. I think it did a really good job of making me think, oh, I sympathize with this person. Oh, wait, no, I don't. I felt it was very good back and forth.
Well, one of the things that I liked the most about the book was how the author complicated everything. So I never liked Alix. I found her problematic, from the start. And even though I wanted to like her, but the places where I felt the most sympathy, or I could engage with her character the most. And actually, one of the things my favorite things about the book in general was how the author complicated everything. So instead of making, it's so much more complicated than we're describing. And one of the things I really loved was Alix's genuine love of Amira and how much she was always wanting to connect. And yes, she didn't do it right, or, all those things, but it was a true, they both loved each other, or they were attracted, they both wanted something from each other. And the author did a beautiful job of continuing that throughout the book. So in the, at the end, when she's talking about Amira's life going on, she's still remembering Alix and the relationship that they would have liked to have. And it's not just about race. It's also about the really complicated relationship about mothering and childcare. And so she just managed to take these really important, large issues, but give us really real character faces on them, and then complicate it and complicate it and complicate it. So I was kind of surprised by the end that I actually still didn't like Alix. But I didn't.
Yeah, well, I almost felt like I felt that way through the whole story until the last chapter or the last bit of the book, where the author just threw leaks down when she said that she actually knew about all of the things. You know, she understood what happened with the boyfriend and the break-in and all of that, and she just chose to ignore the fact that she was wrong and continued that it was everybody else's fault and I didn't do anything wrong. So I agree 100% until the end when the author just smashed it, you know, just destroyed Elise in my mind.
It's interesting because this could have read like an issue book. Because if you think about it, there are a lot of different things that we could pick out, you know, like you said, certainly the issues of race and class, but also on parenting and the balance of, you know, what's the right thing to do after college. But because the plot was so driving and the characters were so fun, like it never felt like homework reading this book. And I both read it when it first came out, and then I listened to it on audiobook as a refresher right before this, which I will also recommend. I think the narrator did an excellent job, especially sometimes that's hard to do when there's multiple perspectives. But even when I had already read it and so kind of knew where everything was going, it still made me think like, oh, well, I can listen to one more chapter. And I love it when an author is able to come up with a book that is driving and interesting and not necessarily super heavy to read, but also gives you plenty to talk about in a book club or something like that. And I thought this was a really excellent balance of the two.
Yeah, I
Emily,
totally agree. Oh, go ahead, Laura. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I definitely agree. I felt like even though it had these serious things that might be, you know, very uncomfortable, like these issues to talk about, but it was in a way that was also like interesting to read. And I didn't realize how many thoughts I got after I was reading it. Like every chapter really changed my perspective. It was like back and forth with the characters, and it left me still thinking about it like to this day. And I finished it a couple weeks ago. So it was definitely like a thought-provoking book, but in a accessible and not, I don't know if fun is the right word, but it was an interesting kind of like comedic elements throughout the book as well. So it made it an enjoyable read.
Yeah, I was gonna say like this was my second reading of it, but even though I knew the story and the outcome, I had the same experience, Emily, where I was like, wow, this is and almost the second reading was better. Like I felt the intensity more, but then the pairing with the like sweet scenes between Briar and Amira and yeah, I was like, this is such a page turner. And I was just really glad that like even a second time through, it was equally as engaging and just exciting to read.
And I think the author, you know, to Laura's point, kind of it raises a lot of issues and questions, but Kiley Reid lets you think about them. You know, she doesn't really tell you how to feel about any one thing. You know, is Amira a little lost? Yes. You know, should she try and find a better job? That's, the author leaves it up to you to think about that, you know, where Alix's, do her intentions ultimately matter? That's for the reader to kind of decide rather than any real, you know, kind of statements by the author, I think, to kind of like make you think about a certain way. She kind of leaves it up to you, which I loved about this book. I think that was one of my favorite things, of just thinking about things myself and, you know, forming opinions that weren't necessarily prompted by the author.
Exactly. I think what she did was remind us as people that, you know, you can pass someone in the street, or you could read about a story or see, you know, a news clip or a YouTube clip, that we all have these interior lives that are so much more complicated. We're so much more complicated. And I loved that introduction, or sort of that delve into, it was a wonderful way to think about race and to think about how we think about racism and prejudice and how we're constantly catching ourselves or thinking about it. And then it was just wonderful to be to be confounded throughout the book of how complicated everyone was. And that's what I really, really enjoyed.
And there's something really unique about the author really doesn't nudge us in a certain direction about whatever opinions we're supposed to feel until the end, where on live TV she really lets have. But then I really do wonder about the intended audience of this book, right? The cover design is this very trendy cover design. You got the Reese's Book Club sticker on it. And really, I think this book is just as much for the Amiras as it is for the Alixes to read. And that's just an interesting question I had in my head is, if we think about who the author was writing this book to or for, how does that inform how we see what happens in the book? Which just makes it infinitely more interesting.
It definitely makes me think of the, well-meaning white lady, and sort of that internal rub against how you feel like you should feel and how maybe you should act, but then how you overpower that. And I was kind of thinking the same thing, Jacob. Like I think about, especially because it has that Reese's Book Club sticker. I think about you think about your stereotypical book club kind of going along for the ride and not knowing where it turns. Because it is interesting. If you're reading the book and empathizing or feeling the most similar to in connection with Alix, do you feel betrayed by some of the actions her character makes later on? Especially when you're reading a book told from a perspective, you kind of put yourself right there. And I could just imagine the book clubs maybe having a little bit of that internal struggle, which is great. It's good for all of us to struggle against who we think we are.
Yeah, I mean, it also has the 2020 Booker Prize long list thing on it. So it is such an interesting, mix. And like, yeah, as Jacob's saying, who is the audience? I would say it's a really vast audience. So
I kind of wanted to ask, and I think this is a good time, there's a lot of kind of surprising events in the book, some very uncomfortable situations, and also from time to time some funny interactions too. And I kind of wanted to ask about your reactions to different events in the book. Were you surprised? How did you react to different things that happened? I just think there's a lot of things that come up. It's just a series of different events that are varied in how they're told, and I'm interested in how people reacted to them.
I liked when Thanksgiving, when Amira and Kelly were coming to the house. You knew what was going to happen when that door opened. You knew, and you just didn't know exactly to what extent was going to happen. I did not think that they were going to actually sit down at the table. That surprised me. And then, of course, Briar manages to save the day by getting everybody out of there. So I really enjoyed that part of it.
Can't you just picture that part as a movie? I don't know if that, who knows where the film rights are, but boy, is that a cinematic scene. And I had the same, even rereading it, like I couldn't exactly remember the specifics, but I was like, oh boy, this is where things turn. I know this is where things turn. And it was, again, a delight to ride along with it a second time.
I feel like leading up to that moment too, knowing that Amira is dating Alix's ex from high school, who basically, in her words, ruined her senior year. And just knowing that, like, that awkward tension, is probably going to come to a head at some point, and you're just anticipating it. And it made me just want to keep reading until we got to that point of Thanksgiving. So I feel like leading up to it. So I don't know. I just love a climax, like ending, like, oh, what's going to happen? So it was really interesting and funny to see the different perspectives of how they both reacted.
I have to admit, I read this book maybe about a year or two ago, So I'm thinking about what do I remember since then? What sticks out to me the most? And there is one scene that felt so real that I was like, you're getting a little too close. And it's when Amira and her friends are all going to go out to the club, and she's like, I have like $72, and like I'm really gonna have to like depend on my rich friend, but like I need to like have fun with my friends, and like even though I might be dressed up, look all pretty and at the club, the reality is I'm a 25-year-old person who has a college degree that I don't know what to do with, and I, can't pay my dental bill. And I was like, you're getting too close. I don't. It's funny because it's not funny. And also, maybe I completely misremembered that and added my own little
No,
flair
that's
to
true.
it. So,
Yeah, that's true.
okay,
It happened.
cool.
She did such a good job about writing about those post-college years, and you're, oh gosh, the clock is ticking to 26, and then I'm not going to have insurance anymore, and like all of those things really, or like the needing a roommate, and like someone offers you a spot in a nicer apartment, and then you have to like, do I have to tell my friends I can't afford this thing? Because that feels bad. Oh, it took me back a decade.
Yeah, wasn't right.
Well, and I feel like there were so many small scenes that were just like, that I almost liked how they made me uncomfortable. Like I think of the scene when Alix is like offering Amira a glass of wine, and like Alix is like so invested and like really like in her mind and wants to get to know this girl and is like trying to be so nice. And Amira is like, she just wants to leave her job and like go on her date, and they're just coming from these completely different perspectives into the same situation. And it was written so well. And like, I was, the dichotomy between the two, I was like, oh no, like they're just coming from such different places. And I loved how many small scenes like that there were in the book that like the author did such a great job of capturing two people in the same experience, but having very different like mental experiences, which of course happens all the time in real life. So I just thought that was really good.
I think some of all of I had that job at, I guess, much younger, but like 2022 of being somebody's, babysitter / nanny of a very successful, older than me woman, and being in the middle of somebody's family. And then you get a very close relationship with the kid because that's your job. And you're 22 or whatever, you've got the energy and the focus to be completely invested in them. And then the mother is always slightly insecure about that relationship. And anyway, it was just there were so many things that stood out, but one of them was really about the fish. When Briar's fish died, and Alix's response was just replace it. And Amira's would have been, let's have a teaching moment and talk about your fish died. And that was just like this, example of how they were so different. And I guess I thought a lot about all those Briar and how much Amira really, relate, or was able to validate her, and was so worried about her in her life. And then anyway, those were the scenes that really resonated, because it's so uncomfortable when you are somebody's babysitter and all that mix between, it's really uncomfortable spaces between women, because you're supposed to be everything as a mother, and you're supposed to be able to have an incredible career. So I mean, there's a lot in this book.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Kelly's character. We haven't spoken a ton about him yet. Another complex character in the book that we kind of find out more about as the book goes on. And I'm very interested in what people thought of him, what you all thought about his intentions with Amira. We learn at the end that this kind of negative thing that we thought we knew about him, with him showing Alix's letters in high school to friends, turned out to be not true. So I'm just interested in your interpretation of his character and what you thought about him.
I thought that even when I found out he didn't write or the letter business wasn't his fault, he's total skis ball. Um, him and Alix are more or less the same person, just different flavors, and they function in Amira's life almost in the same way. They both fetishize her. They both want her attention and affection um, because of the person who she is, but also because she's Black. And in the same way that their actions um, are racist, those racist actions that they commit, they do them, you know, as means to get closer to Amira. They're just so confused, they don't even know that they're doing it. And I'm like, dang, this is some smart stuff going on here in this book. But I also thought he was the funniest. He was the character that was easiest for me to laugh at. Because he's a goofball.
I struggled with the age difference in their relationship in a way that I wouldn't have if they were 30 and 40 rather than 25 and 35. But when there's a decade of difference in two different life spaces, the power dynamic there just feels real off. And I couldn't make that get away from that leap, even though I didn't think that was supposed to, the things that were supposed to charm me about him earlier on when you were supposed to be charmed by him, I was still just like, he's too old for you. So I struggled with Kelly, but he was interesting and made the story more nuanced.
Yeah, well, I think that power dynamic, also, it's like what you were saying, Jacob, how he and Alix are really like, two of a kind, is that they both assume that they know what is best for Amira constantly. And they're kind of like, and it comes from this place of like, I think their belief that they're very liberal and they have these very open views, but in fact, it's kind of the complete opposite, and it's like Kelly saying, well, you should release this video. Or, you have Alix like counting in her head the number of Black friends that she has to Thanksgiving. And it's like, they both have this idea that's this like, that they are in the right place, but they're constantly deciding what they think is best and telling Amira, do it this way. When they're just so much alike in that way.
I agree with you, Lucy, and going off of that, like, I think they're so concerned with how the world sees them as like, all of Alix's friends, like, who were at Thanksgiving, and she was counting how many Black friends she has, like, to be able to show, oh, Amira, like, look at all my Black friends. Same with Kelly, all of his friends that he shows up with at the club are Black, and it's just interesting how they are, I think, very concerned with how others are perceiving them. And like, it's interesting how they're two sides of the coin, but in different ways too.
And how absurd is it is that they need to be perceived by others as people who are within proximity of Blackness? It's like, that's you guys are weird. But like, it's
I was like, why are you being weird?
but we know why. But it's also like, stop.
Yeah, stop. Yeah.
I think one of my favorite like intense conversations in this book is between Alix and Kelly when she goes and Alix finds him and he's like, well, you made Amira wear a uniform. And then they have this whole conversation and they're talking about the night she got like at the thing that happened in the grocery store, and Alix's line is like, well, it wouldn't have happened if she'd been wearing a uniform. Yet like 2 seconds before that, Alix is trying to defend herself saying, no, I didn't make her wear a uniform. And it's like, you are so confused and just also, yeah, stop being you right now. And but the intensity of that and the way they just go back and forth between trying to figure out it, what side they're on. And that just moment just struck me. I was like, wait, you were just defending her not wearing a uniform. Now you're saying if she had been wearing a uniform, everything would have been okay. So I don't know.
So one of the things that confused me that I like and I'm saying this like I genuinely didn't get, is we find out at the end of the book that like a bunch of the letters, including the one with like her house code, Alix, who in high school was named Alex, like they had like Kelly presumably hadn't gotten them. They'd fallen into the locker below. But we know that he got some of her letters because he tells Amira that when they're at the Mexican restaurant that his high school girlfriend would write him these like flowery letters and he thought that was like over the top. So do we just think that some of them went through and some of them didn't? And then the one that had the house code went into the locker below, which was Robbie's locker, who ended up being the person who broke into the house and the police were called on. But then Kelly was still at Alex's house. That like I was just like confused by that scene. How do people interpret it? Because I was like, this feels important to know like what Kelly knew and didn't know, but I just couldn't quite put it all together. So how did others interpret that?
I made the leap that though he didn't get the letter that she gave him with the map and the code and all of that, she still probably invited him over and let him in so that he didn't need a code. Is at least the way that, because you're right, that's kind of where the gap is. Because it does make sense that, yeah, maybe some things would slip through the cracks in the locker and some didn't. And gosh, she writes so many letters that, you know, a few can go unnoticed and you wouldn't even realize you missed something. But yeah, how he got there that night in the first place, I just assumed that, you know, if your parents are out of town and you're planning this big thing, you're not going to have the letter be your only invitation or mention of it.
I'm not sure that they even say which letters she finds, though. I was just looking at it again, and it's like because I was like, yeah, you're right, Elizabeth, that's really confusing. And then I was looking, and it's like she found these letters, but they just say she found 5 of her unopened letters, and she just shoved them in her shirt, and then that's that. So maybe that's intentional on the author's part, like. We don't know, which, you know, the thing that was kind of confusing unanswered throughout the book is still unanswered for us in a way, I guess.
I interpreted it that Robbie received the letter and, you know, assumed it was an invitation for him, and that's why he went. And that, and Alex didn't know, and neither did Kelly. But so it explained the confusion of everyone, you know, that Robbie wouldn't have just shown up unknown, you know, uninvited with the code and everything. And then Alex honestly didn't know she had invited him. So called the, you know, sort of like it, that sort of cascade of accident and not intentionally hurting seemed like one of the themes through the book, you know, of sort of like these things happen and then they all snowball. And yes, by the end it's different, but for at least that beginning. So that was, yeah, I wasn't, or that was the spin I put on it by the end.
Yeah, there are so many instances in this book where it's just intentions just do not match up with other people's desires, and it's just kind of like catastrophe ensues in some ways. And I kind of wanted to talk about the sort of climactic scene where there's Amira agrees to do the television interview, and she does not realize that Alix is the one who ultimately leaked the video of the grocery store scene that we see at the start. She initially misinterprets that Kelly leaked it, and she agrees to go on TV, but finds out right before going on that it was in fact Alix that leaked the video. And this is what ultimately leads her to quit working for the Chamberlains and kind of break ties with them at all. And I wanted to talk about that scene because that really is kind of the final scene before the like, you know, few pages at the very end. And it's pretty dramatic and like definitely fairly stressful for all the characters. And yeah, I just wanted to touch on that and folks' interpretations and reactions.
Well, it was painful, and I knew it was going to be painful coming up to it, so it was very like stressful to read because you knew everyone was, but I thought it was a great sort of character maturation for Amira because, thanks to her friend, she really, she didn't do it until she actually had a job offer with health insurance and all those inner things that she had been not feeling successful enough about. So that I could cheer on that aspect of her, sort of coming into her own a bit. I found the scene of her saying goodbye to Briar just so heart-wrenching, and I could just picture it so clearly. So I thought it was beautifully done.
This is just super quick, but I was also kind of struck by the fact that the good job that she managed to negotiate for was still such a small paycheck for living in New York City. And I kind of liked that the victory was not a huge victory. It made everything feel a little bit more real and a little bit more true, even though, of course, you hope for more for your characters. But I do like that everything wasn't tied up with a bow, and now she has the perfect career that will ride her out forever, although maybe in some ways a little bit, but that it wasn't just the Deus Ex Machina, here is all your problems are solved. Instead, it was a balance of like, well, I might make a little less money, but I'll feel better about myself.
That again speaks to the fact that she was so true to herself. It was more important for her to settle for less money and know she was in the right place than to take to be bought. So,
And in a way, like you realize that the not perfect job that she takes at the end, which is the better thing for her and the more mature thing for her, and it's a real job. Like it makes it seem like she's maybe going to go back into childcare, or that she just intuitively understands that like goldfish are better in a cup. And I thought that I really loved that because I think that one of the things in this book that sort of frustrated me for Amira is that I think she really loves taking care of Briar, but also she's really good at taking care of kids, and she's really good at kids, and that's just not ever validated for her in this book. She's always made to feel like that's kind of just this mediocre stepping stone, and I think there's this question of like, well, why can't that count as success? So I liked at the end how it seemed like maybe she was going to get to use the skills that she's good at, but also that she really enjoyed.
In what job should earn more money than somebody taking care of children? You know what I'm trying to say? Like, and while Alix gets to what's her nonprofit? She advocates for women to be empowered through writing correspondence. Do I remember that correctly?
Basically, yes.
So she's doing that, which prevents her from caring for her child. So she has to hire somebody to take care of her child. It's like, well, maybe, I don't know. The book is so modern, and it is also the oldest tale ever told. I feel Black women have been taking care of white women's children for 300 years, 250 years. Poor women have been taking care of rich women's children forever. And it's just like so modern, and it's about millennials, and but it's also what's been happening as long as we can remember.
But
I was all over the place,
but that's what was so great about this. That's what made this book worth reading, is how it turned every trope like that on its head. Because the sad part was that Mira actually really loved taking care of kids. But again, exactly what you're saying, like, but it's really not okay because they've been, poor and Black women have always been exploited doing this, but that's what Amira actually felt fulfilled doing. So it was like, that's what was great, was every time you tried to tie something up or close a door, the author complicated it. So Amira really feeling fulfilled and then not getting to continue that was like it just shows it showed that it's not just one way, like what about people who are fulfilled taking care of kids, and there's not a place for them, and so anyway, that's what I really liked, was that every time I tried to get a handle on it, of, oh, this is, this sort of racism or that sort of racism, then it complicated, the author complicated the story. And so that's what it was really helpful to keep tripping up in your own mind.
The book is a constant reminder of like, yeah, this is all really complicated. And that's reassuring to hear. But in its complexity, it's also really simple. If Alix treated Amira like a real person and paid her like a real person, then Amira could spend her life doing this thing that she loves, which is caring for children. And Alix would get the labor that she needs from Amira, and everything would be fine and dandy. But she can't see her as a person.
Yeah, and Briar would have turned out as a better adult. How will she turn out with a parent like that? I felt like it was a modern day The Help. The book / movie The Help. How it was kind of like what you had said a little while ago, Jacob. It's been happening for hundreds of years. It was just that took place in the 50s, and here we are in today's time, and it's the same thing. Yeah.
And now I'm not even gonna start my The Help rant. But totally, yeah.
It's yeah.
Although the last line of the book was so, I think I thought about that a lot. It was that, again, made everything a little bit more complex, of how clearly Amira saw things and what she saw for Bree. And so yeah, that I don't know, that stayed with me uncomfortably.
There was something still hopeful about seeing Briar ask for help, though, because we saw that she wasn't getting what she needed from her mom. And, we can hope that would change, but that she knew what she needed and would ask someone for it. And hopefully, Briar continues to advocate for herself. I thought that was I appreciated that little ending note, and not having the last bit of Briar we saw be the goodbye. Because, even as a reader, I was caring for this 3-year-old. I wanted her to get through there too.
Going off of that though, I'm rereading it. And I do just find it so interesting that Kiley Reid decided to have Briar ask it was two Black nannies who were behind her. I just find it so interesting that she wrote it as Briar asking them. And I just wonder, what she meant by that. I know everything's so purposeful, but it's just something to think about for sure.
So this is kind of interesting, because often we ask, have you read other things by this author, or would you like to, or things like that, as we wrap up a discussion. But this is Kiley Reid's first book, so this is kind of exciting. There's not, she's written for a variety of publications, short form things, but this is her first novel. And I guess, so my question that I want to kind of close on is, do you think this was a good choice for the Washtenaw Read? How do you feel about it being this year's selection? And I guess just, do you think it was a good choice for 2023?
I was really pleased to see when this one had been chosen. Like I said, I read it beforehand, but I think that because it has that balance we talked about of being very readable, but bringing issues and being complicated and making you sit with how you feel about things, I think that it will it's something that people will hopefully pick up and read to the end, not even just like start it and say, oh, well, it turns out this isn't for me. But then we'll be forced to think about things you might not want to think about, which I think is a great thing. I'm also kind of excited that Kiley Reid has not written another book yet, because I really like it when people don't rush out with one after their debut and really take their time coming up with something next, because I don't want her to be a one book gal. I want to read what she does next, and I want her to take her time with it. So excited for whenever that happens.
Yes, it definitely for me fell in the category of an enjoyable book, not a book you didn't feel like you were forced into reading it. Picked it up and just thoroughly looked forward to my time that I got to sit and read. So, and one that I'll pass on. Absolutely will. Hey, you got to read. A good sit down with a cup of tea book.
I think any book that makes you think about yourself and your place in the world, like this book does, is great for a large community to read. And I think that I saw myself in some ways in all the characters, even when they were behaving badly. And I had to go, okay, let me rethink this thing I did. Let me rethink. So I think if making the community rethink or assess how they fit into the wider world, I think that's a wonderful task to set forth. And by task, it wasn't much of a task because it was so much fun.
I agree. I agree completely. And that it was enjoyable and pulled you in and you cared about the characters, but then to be constantly shown through the characters how complex they were. It's just such a great reminder to when we walk by someone to remember that they have so much more going on behind their face than you would initially think. And so I think that's a wonderful thing for a community to be, have exposure to in such a complex and delicious read. So I think it's great.
Well, I'm glad that the group enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the author's talk at the library. I thought it was interesting too, since Kiley Reid wrote this book, she's now an assistant professor at the University of Michigan. So she's become local, which she was not before. So that's kind of cool too. And I'm interested to see, I don't know if she's writing another book, but I hope so, like Emily said. And I'll be interested to see, where it's set and what, if our local area has any influences on her, since she's been teaching here too. So thank you all so much for being a part of this discussion today. I really appreciate it. And thank you to anyone who tuned in to listen to the recording. And just one more time, Kiley Reid will be visiting AADL on Sunday, February 5th at 4 p.m. for a discussion, question and answer session and book signing. So go ahead and put that on your calendar if that sounds like something you would like to join for. And thanks again, everyone, for being here. Have a wonderful rest of the day.